terrorist attacks in Tunisia, Egypt and Turkey have had a devastating effect on regional tourism. The conflicts and political upheaval of the Arab Spring had already put many people off taking a holiday by the southern Mediterranean. Images of the attacks at Istanbul airport and on a Russian holiday flight over the Sinai are still fresh in people's minds and influencing the chosen destinations of millions of Europeans. The terrorist attack on this beach in Sousse in Tunisia took place on June the 25th, 2015. The journalist Mabrouka Kadir was at the scene of the ambush a few moments after it happened, in front of the Imperial Mahaba Hotel. She saw things she'll never be able to forget.
It was complete chaos. Tourists on the ground, shot. Blood was flowing into the sea and into the pool. These were images almost too hard to bear.
Sefidin Yacoubi, a student, opened fire with a Kalashnikov on the beach and in the Imperial Mahaba, killing 38 holidaymakers, most of them British, before he himself was shot dead by police. The hotel is still closed today. The attack traumatized the country and its people like no other.
I was ashamed. This is not my Tunisia. This is not our country. And this is not why we invite tourists to come here. To see and experience that was deeply sad and shocking. The victims, the blood in the sea, the weeping people. I hope Tunisia never has to go through something like that again.
The attack by a lone gunman, trained by the IS in neighboring Libya, cleared out the beaches of Tunisia in one go. Many hotels had to close down. Zora Idris, owner of the Imperial Mahaba Hotel, let her employees go. Her business only survived the crisis because she also owns other hotels elsewhere.
It was hell. It was hell for me. It was hell for my clients, for the staff, for the city of Sousse, for the whole country and beyond Tunisia. The terrorists want to attack the country's economy. Tourism is one of the main foundations of our economy. 400,000 people work directly, and almost another 400,000 work indirectly in the tourism industry.
The consequences were even more dramatic in Djerba than in Sousse, where tourism collapsed by 80%. A crash that affects practically every family on the island, as tourism is the most important source of income for the population. Thousands of employees were let go. Suad Aliani worked in a senior position at the Spring Club Djerba Hotel for 23 years. When it suddenly closed a few months ago, everyone was made redundant. Their calls for a settlement fell on deaf ears. The hotel owner disappeared abroad.
Just closing all the doors and leaving us by the wayside. It doesn't work like that. And then people complain there is terrorism. But that's how you create terrorism. It's their fault. The problem needs to be solved quickly. I'm speaking my mind. Others spend their evenings crying and full of despair at home because they don't know a way out.
Suad's husband Semi also lost his job in the hotel and needs to sell the family car to make ends meet. Many people are in the same position. Semi Aliyani has found a new job as a security worker, but his income is now much lower.
We're in serious financial difficulties. I can't manage to cover the mortgage on my wife's house by myself anymore. So we're forced to sell the car to pay the mortgage. If we don't do that, the banks will be merciless, and we'll end up in court.
But so far, Semi hasn't managed to sell the car. There are too many on offer. The low prices are ruining the market. Suad Aliyani worries every day. Soon the family will not be able to meet their payments. 150 euros a month is all that remains for the family of 5. That's barely enough for food, let alone school books and uniforms for the children. She's asked the state for support, but received none.
I have never owed the state anything, and now, after 23 years, it's giving me the cold shoulder. I should sue, but the lawyer needs a deposit. A court bailiff also costs something before he does his work. And that without my wages? We can't cover these costs with a single income. We may as well go and beg.
If things don't change, we're very scared. It's not just us. All my colleagues who worked in tourism are suffering. We hope this crisis will pass soon.
If the tourists continue to stay away from Jebba, poverty threatens to take hold of the island once more. Throngs of visitors used to jostle past the market stalls of Humt Souk. Tourists from Britain and Germany in particular were fond of vacationing on Jebba. Today, Lotfi Chehit and his colleagues are waiting in vain for customers. Lotfi cannot live off the few local sales. It's only thanks to his savings that he can manage to keep his shop open.
We have a little business from the Tunisians. A few Algerians come. But for the rest of the year, there are only locals here. That's not enough to cover costs. This situation has forced many people to leave this line of work. People no longer find jobs. Many flee illegally to Europe. Everyone is looking for alternatives.
8 hours later, Lotfi is still waiting for customers. When they do arrive, he's hard-pressed to make a sale. He misses the Europeans who like to spend money. The visit to the bazaar was a popular activity for many travellers.
Work is done now. I need to take everything in. Maybe tomorrow will be better.
It takes him 2 hours to bring the goods inside. Lotfi works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, but remains patient and friendly.
I sold maybe 2 or 3 things. This morning, there was a little trade with the Russians, thank goodness, but that was it. Everything brings its part. Every day is different. Inshallah, that the future will get better.
Since the attack in Sousse, security measures have been tightened everywhere. Twice as many policemen and private security forces guard the beaches and control major junctions. The driveways and entrances to hotels are also closely watched. The higher the security levels at the hotels, the more bookings they receive. All the large hotels have ramped up security and trained security forces. The rapidly implemented measures to tighten security were an important step for Tourism Minister Alioumi Rekik. About 1/6 of Tunisia's population of 11 million earns its livelihood from tourism.
We have introduced compulsory security measures and protocols in the hotels, restaurants, at the main sightseeing destinations, airports. Our security concepts are up to international standards. But that doesn't mean that there's zero risk. We saw what happened in Brussels, France, and the US. Luckily, tourism improved a little in 2016.
Tunis is still the only capital in the Arab world where democracy has begun to take root, although this freedom was accompanied by economic crisis. After the unrest of the Arab Spring, tourism started to decline. The terror attacks severely worsened the situation. This square in Tunis was where demonstrators gathered in January 2011 in front of the Ministry of the Interior as the Jasmine Revolution reached a critical stage. Thousands protested against the decades of autocratic government and self-enrichment under dictator Ben Ali. That was the start of the Arab Spring. The dictator has long since fled the country. After several unstable governments, it appears the country's political situation has been slowly stabilizing since the last election in 2014. Mabrouka Kadir is meeting with journalist friends. She has to give an interview about protests on the Karkana Islands for an Arab TV channel. In contrast to many of her colleagues, she doesn't only know the region's capital, but also its rural areas. She regularly reports on internal tensions in the country, tensions that are exacerbated by the lack of tourists. Reports such as these would previously have been severely censored.
Before the revolution, it was hard to work together with an international broadcaster. I am now a correspondent for a European channel. Now, there is a certain level of free speech. We can address many issues. It's easy to get filming permission, and I can work without restrictions.
Mabrouka is currently working on a report in the northwest of the country, where many people have no access to drinking water. The locals in this rural region are forced to rely on contaminated water from a valley. Due to corruption, the local drinking water supply has collapsed. The economic crisis aggravates grievances and widens the divide between rich and poor.
There are people in these regions who are really suffering. They have the feeling that even after the revolution, the government is not taking care of them. And so people begin to revolt and demonstrate, which is why there is still no stability there today.
Dissatisfaction is particularly acute amongst young people. In January 2016, in the city of Kasserine in central Tunisia, there were protests against high unemployment and a lack of prospects. 2 people were killed and many wounded in clashes with police. In the chaos of the revolution, especially in the more remote regions, Salafist preachers recruited around 6,000 IS militants for the fight against President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Professor Alayani teaches politics at the university in Tunis. He's very familiar with the jihadist movement and terror groups within Tunisia.
In those days, the government didn't control the mosques. We had 5,500 mosques in Tunisia, and almost a third of them were under Salafist control. There, the Islamists set up a number of charitable organizations, and thanks to these, received funds from the Gulf states. This enabled a large funded recruitment of youth that was sent to Libya or Syria.
comme la Syrie, comme la Libye. La personne qui peut
Whoever recruited a person as a fighter was given $20,000. There was a competition. There were people who recruited up to 10. That meant a whole $200,000. So jihadism became a type of industry.
Donc ça devient une industrie, le djihadisme.
The influence of IS terrorist propaganda and Salafist preachers is being actively countered by the Tunisian government. It controls the mosques and has revoked the right of radical imams to preach. Libya is just 60 kilometers from Jaba. The military has reinforced 200 kilometers of the border to prevent the infiltration of IS terrorists from the neighboring country. In early March 2016, there was a major ambush here. 30 IS terrorists broke through the border and stormed the frontier town of Ben Gadan. All attackers were shot dead. 48 people, including many security staff, were killed.
Peut-être le seul problème, c'est les cellules dormantes.
At the moment, the largest problems are the sleeper cells. There aren't many, but the issues can only be solved with good economic policy. If there is social and economic improvement, then these sleeper cells will also disappear.
D'ailleurs, notre président cite toujours cette phrase et il dit les Tunisiens.
Our president often says, the Tunisians are like reeds growing on the riverbank. They bend when a wind comes, but they straighten up again afterward. Now we're on the ground, but we will rise again and will fight terrorism like all other countries in the world. We will win in the end.
On finira par gagner.
Camel guide Saber Misbah is now resigned to waiting for customers. The steep steps of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt used to be teeming with tourists. Now they're deserted. The camel tour to the other side of the pyramids was his and his family's income source for many years. After the unrest in Cairo in 2011, he had to use up his savings as tourism dwindled. Since then, business hasn't been good.
Maybe like 40% to 50%. بالعربي or English one. أعتقد اللي هي الوقت حاليا.
On a good day, we have half as many tourists as we used to. I hope that it'll slowly improve. The situation has gotten a little better. Some complain and moan, but not me. Some have given up their jobs and others continue. I've got to go now.
The upheaval of the last years has had severe consequences for Saber and for Egypt as a whole. 6 years ago, Cairo, with its 22 million inhabitants, became the focus of the Arab Spring with its protests and violence. One result was a dearth of visitors that continues to this day. Egypt's revolution began in January 2011 in central Tahrir Square. The spark from Tunis had ignited Cairo. 15,000 demonstrators occupied the square, declaring days of rage and demanding democratic reforms. Reviled President Hosni Mubarak was forced by the masses to step down. The first free election in the country's history in 2012 saw the Muslim Brotherhood gain power. After only a year, there were more furious protests, followed by a military coup. The army cracked down hard on the Brotherhood and its followers. The military deliberately killed hundreds of demonstrators, including women and children. In 2014, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, came to power in new elections with a huge majority. Since then, the military has ruled with an iron fist, closing down newspapers and throwing journalists and dissidents into prison. Our camera team was escorted by armed minders who did not let us out of their sight. The media as a whole is under surveillance. Egyptian publications are censored. The country has once again become a police state. One evening, we secretly met the human rights activist Mohsen Hassan, who won the Alternative Nobel Prize for her struggle on behalf of women's rights. She's one of the few who still dares to speak openly in front of the camera.
The public space is really closed based on different laws and regulations, but for civil society it's really hard. We are really on a crackdown that most of the organizations, including our organization and me personally, are accused of foreign funding, and supposedly this case could extend to life sentence. And at the same time, they are putting pressure generally on our existence. Most of us, in this case, who are the human rights defenders, are on travel ban, like me personally.
In the city centre, where thousands of European tourists once visited the Khan al-Khalili Bazaar, the largest market in Africa, it's only the locals who make purchases, alongside a few tourists from neighbouring countries. In the last year under Mubarak, around 15 million tourists flocked to the country by the Nile. Those numbers are now closer to 5 million. Zakaria Gonheim misses the European and American tourists who would spend far more money than the locals.
The changes taking place in the Arabic countries have led to an economic decline. But after this, there will be good business again, God willing.
His suppliers work a few courtyards away at the bazaar. The craftsmen are also suffering due to the lull. Without the export market, they would have had to close up shop. Since their youth, they've been working as silversmiths, specializing in delicately finished jewelry. It's a traditional craft that is now in danger of dying out.
We used to make a good living from it and could live well. There was a lot of work. My Uncle Hassan and I would work for other people after we were done here to earn extra money. There used to be 6 or 7 of us in this workshop. Now we're 3. 2 of us are old. You understand?
There is no one left who wants to learn this trade. Send us apprentices if you have any. Send them to us.
If customers continue to stay away, they will be the last to ply a dying trade. An Egyptian cultural tradition is threatened with extinction. Minister Yaha Rashed refuses to regard this as a crisis. The tourism ministry prefers not to talk about the job losses.
I was in Paris last week, and one of the journalists came and said, it is more safe in Sharm el-Sheikh than in Nice. And that is the fact of the matter. So, it all depends on how you look at things. The message is clear. Egypt is safe by all measures, and I don't want to address this to the German public or the French public, because we're all on the same equation, all of us.
Just before sunset, Saba Misbah ends his day. He lives with his family of 8 and 15 further relatives and children in a small house not far from the pyramids.
I was born here, married here. This is my house, my life, and my family. When the revolution started, there was no more work. None. Now there's a little work. You can live off it again. But it's not like it was. We can buy food, but we can't save anything.
We hope that the situation will improve. At the moment, it's not looking good. I hope very much it will be better for the next generation. It looks difficult for us now. We will probably not experience good tourism anymore.
For now, all they have left is the breathtaking view of the pyramids, with or without the tourists. Beach life at Sharm el-Sheikh, 500 kilometers from Cairo. The beaches along the Red Sea are empty. The hotels chronically underbooked. In October 2015, a Russian charter flight blew up over the Sinai. 224 people were killed. According to Moscow, there was a bomb on the plane. Visitor numbers to Egypt plummeted. Only 6 months later, an Egypt air flight crashed into the Mediterranean. 66 people were killed. Again, terrorism was suspected. The consequences for Egyptian tourism were catastrophic, whether in Cairo or at the Red Sea. 500 hotels closed down. Hotel director Franz Kielenhofer says he's never seen anything like it. The only reason the Sheraton can stay open is because it's part of a large chain.
When you see it so empty, it's awful. It hurts. It's not good. We've had to let about 420 employees go in 6 months, more than 2/3, and we're trying to keep those who are left. We send no one on unpaid leave, and we're not reducing their pay. Life is hard enough for the people. We don't want to make it harder. We try to support the people who work for us.
Business used to be booming in the shopping quarter of Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, 2/3 of the people who worked here have lost their jobs. Of the 900,000 hotel workers in Egypt, 600,000 are now unemployed. For the governor of the South Sinai region, General Khaled Fouda, the plane crashes are the worst thing that could have happened. From one day to the next, the region's entire economy was broken.
More than $3 billion. Billion.
It cost us more than $3 billion. Can you imagine what we could have done with this $3 billion? We could build schools and hospitals and improve opportunities for our children. We could build houses for our children. Now they are living in slums. That tourism has been destroyed is a harsh punishment for the state and for the entire region. For the terrorists, the crimes and atrocities are a success.
IS boasted that it smuggled a bomb aboard the Russian plane at Sharm el-Sheikh airport. The security standards were internationally condemned. We used a hidden camera after permission to film in the airport was denied. Security checks have been intensified, and every item of baggage is X-rayed and sealed.
We've implemented all recommended security measures for the airport. We've taken the criticism seriously. Now it's up to the countries that have deserted us. The tourists should come back. From our side, we've done everything we can.
An hour's flight away is the city of Luxor by the Nile, with its world-famous ancient ruins. Tourism here has collapsed completely. It was the most important income source for the majority of the population. Everyone was affected as family members lost their jobs. Since the 19th century, Luxor has been a dream destination for culture tourists. But in this city with its great history, there are barely any Europeans to be seen. At least more visitors are coming from Arab countries, out of solidarity, they say. The 4,000-year-old temple city of Karnak, 2 kilometers from Luxor, is the largest temple complex in Egypt and one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Ahmed Noubi, head of the information department in Luxor, knows every relief and every column of the famous hall that was completed by Ramses II. It pains him that terrorism has scared the guests away and that the ancient ruins are no longer being maintained.
We were one of the ones who suffered a lot from terrorism. We can't forget the decade of terrorism in Egypt, which hit the tourism in Egypt very badly and ended by the massacre of Queen Hatshepsut in 1997.
The first major Islamist terrorist attack in Egypt was at Hatshepsut's temple. 58 holidaymakers were slaughtered. The Islamist Union Jama al-Islamiyah was behind the attack. Since then, there have been several jihadist attacks by different terrorist groups against Egypt's military government. Security measures in Luxor have long since been tightened. When there was an attack 2 years ago, armed security forces responded immediately. Ahmed Noubi hopes that lovers of antiquity from Europe and America will return soon. That would also help pay for further excavations in Karnak.
This civilization, it belongs to the mankind, and all of us has to enjoy and to preserve and to make the reconstructions. Layers of civilization. The Greeks, when they came to Egypt, they took from the ancient Egyptians their philosophy, their medicine, their sciences, and then the European civilization was built upon the Greeks one for the Renaissance. Then the new American civilization, it's built upon the European civilization. So if you see,
it's all connected.
All connected back to Egypt.
Now the Chinese are discovering the World Heritage Site for themselves. Since their president visited Luxor in 2015, they've been coming by the thousands, a new ray of hope for Luxor. But the cruise ships along the Nile have not yet managed to attract Chinese clientele. Of the former 260 hotel ships that cruised between Luxor and Aswan, only a dozen remain on the water. Istanbul and the rest of Turkey are also suffering under a volatile combination of instability, terrorism and economic decline. In comparison to previous years, revenues from tourism have fallen by a third. The attack at the Blue Mosque in 2016 was only the first of a string of atrocities that year. The IS bomber blew himself up in the middle of a group of German tourists on the square between the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. 13 people were killed and 14 wounded. There was another attack at Ataturk Airport at the end of June 2016. 3 terrorists, presumably members of IS, killed 41 people. In the entrance hall, one of the assassins opened fire with a Kalashnikov and detonated his explosive device. The 2 others also blew themselves up. 239 people were wounded. Only 2 weeks later, the country was shaken by an attempted military coup. Parts of the military wanted to overthrow President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. 247 people were killed across the country and more than 2,000 wounded. The Turkish government said preacher Fethullah Gulen and his Hizmet movement were behind the coup. In the following weeks and months, President Erdogan's government launched a crackdown. Tens of thousands were arrested. Not only Gulen supporters were thrown into prison, but also opposition politicians, especially from the HDP party, which got many of its votes from the minority Kurdish population. In late October 2016, it was the turn of the openly critical newspaper Cumhuriyet to face state oppression. The editor-in-chief and 12 other journalists were arrested. There was widespread international condemnation of this new blow against press freedom. According to the Turkish Union of Journalists, around 170 media organizations have been closed down since the attempted coup. Only a few journalists, like the well-known author Ahmed Şık, still dare to openly criticize the government.
Over 120 journalists are in jail. After the attempted coup, it was about 40. Now it's 3 times as many. Of course, they include many friends and colleagues of mine. This is a junta government. They can do anything without being controlled. Open discussion is not possible.
Ahmed Şık has been detained since giving this interview. He had a feeling that his name would be on a list.
I don't think any truly Islamic politician can be a Democrat. Islam is a religion that juxtaposes democracy. In Turkey, religion is being instrumentalized by a right-wing government that's increasingly authoritarian. The regime is showing dictatorial traits. Turkey is similar to a kingdom in the Middle East. Democracy, that was once upon a time.
The square by the Hagia Sophia, empty. The world-famous bazaar is deserted. The terror attacks, the coup, and the ensuing state repression have scared off the tourists. Even Antalya, a popular holiday destination, is suffering from a drought in visitors. The bazaar in Antalya's old town is reminiscent of desolate Jerba and Cairo, yet chances of improvement are much lower here. Terrorist attacks in Turkey are not only increasing, but social conflicts are also on the rise. Umut Akduman represents workers of the tourism industry. He voices the hardship of those who have lost their jobs.
75% have been hit by the economic crash. Of 600,000 employees, only 150,000 are still working in this region. Most of them only have temporary work, between 3 and 5 months.
Vendors and guides at the amphitheatre in Aspendos, not far from Antalya, hope that at least the Russian tourists will return, as Erdogan and Vladimir Putin seem to be getting along again. At the waterfalls in Manavgat, a few Russians can be found, but they alone cannot make up for the lack of European crowds. The all-inclusive hotels eastward of Antalya are only 30% full. Here the focus on package holidays is backfiring badly. Customers come because of the low prices, not to get to know the local people and their customs, and they don't spend like other tourists. Umut Akduman has a modest office in Antalya, even though he's in charge of the only union for all those who work in tourism. He believes the current crisis is reinforcing the mistakes made in the past.
The all-inclusive hotels attract short-stay holidaymakers and bargain hunters. Most have little money to spend. They take cheap holidays and no money stays in the country.
In Umut Akduman's opinion, Turkey needs to concentrate more on individual tourism, focusing on small boutique hotels and expanding its cultural offering. Only if the relationship between the tourists, the region and the country is nurtured, he believes, will guests return in times of crisis too. Statistically, the region of Antalya is safer than France's Côte d'Azur.
Turkey has destroyed tourism with homemade mistakes in foreign and domestic policy and mistakes in developing the tourism industry. This is why Turkey is in this situation now. It's our fault. We've done the damage to ourselves.
The chances of a revival of tourism from the EU appear low. Democracy is under threat. Social tensions are on the rise. This is evident from over a dozen Islamist and Kurdish terrorist attacks in just 1 year. In Egypt, people seem to have gotten used to military rule again. Most people accept it as a necessary evil and believe that it will provide the security needed to bring the tourists back.
Egypt has been the first tourism destination on earth, okay? And today, we're not saying anything new. We are saying that basically the Egyptian tourism deserves to be at the head of this industry.
Tunisia has taken the greatest steps to protect its tourists and the future of its own people. If the country remains democratic and the youth profit from reforms, a stable development will be possible.
We have noticed that the situation has improved a little. If you compare it to the year of the attack, it really was very empty. But slowly, there is an upturn.
For years, sun, beach and cost were the main considerations for many people going on holiday. Now one more has been added to the list: the fear of terrorism. In this part of the world, the time of carefree holidays in the sun is over for now.